Spirit. Christ is in our midst.
He is and ever shall be.
How many of you are disappointed by politics? It's kind of, in our day and age, pretty easy to be disappointed. Now, the thing about politics and the governing of any state is that, of course, especially in a democracy like ours, is that some days people love you, some days people hate you, and you might not have changed much between those days. The people are very fickle. The leaders are very fickle. They make promises and the next day change their minds, and the people are left hanging. It really doesn't matter, but in a society in general, we know that people have always been politically dissatisfied. And particularly in the case when there are strong hopes for some sort of deliverance or some sort of progress being made. Now, in American politics, this happens, of course, all the time. You know, we raise up political messiahs, and then we watch them fall from their thrones of grace. And it doesn't matter which side of the aisle they're on, ultimately this is almost guaranteed to happen. This happens in the church, too. I can remember people raising up a metropolitan and weeping as he was elected. What a wonderful guy. 2 years later, out. 2 or 3 years later, out. No problem. Now, certainly there's reasons for this on both sides, for the people and for the leaders who are elected, who are involved. Certainly there's reason for this. But it's just so normal. You know, the Psalms say that a hope deferred makes the heart sick. And when we put our hopes in people, it often can make our hearts very sick because people have clay feet and they will always disappoint us. They're always going to fail in some ways, especially if our expectations aren't quite in line with their capabilities or aren't in line with what they've actually might have promised. Because, you know, in politics and when we raise up these political messiahs, oftentimes we're blind to the full message. We're hinging on that part of the message that we think is going to save us, that is going to be about what we want, because ultimately elections are about getting what we want. Or at least that's what they've come to mean and have meant, although not from the best parts of us, but from our fallen humanity. This week we come to the Sunday of Palms, and Jesus has just committed done his seventh wondrous sign, where he raised up Lazarus from the dead. And many of the Jews witnessed this. They went and mourned with Mary and Martha, so they would have seen this miracle of the 4 days dead Lazarus being brought from the tomb. And Jesus had been away from Jerusalem for a while. So while he's away, he's going through various villages. There's healings, miracles, and all sorts of signs. And what the people, what the peasantry, what the everyday population has come to acknowledge about Christ is that maybe this is indeed the Messiah. Maybe this is the promised one, the promised King, who will come and redeem Israel, who will come and, in a sense, inaugurate a new era of, we could say any type of leadership, but we could say political, a new era for the temple, a new era for the Israelites who are subjected under Roman authority. Jesus represented a lot of things to a lot of people. Now, he comes into Jerusalem today, which is somewhat of a provocative act. Provocative because if we remember yesterday's gospel, Thomas says, yes, let's go to Judea, where Lazarus is, so that we may die. So it's well known in John's gospel that the Jews are plotting to kill Jesus. Why are they plotting to kill him? Well, because we love things to stay the same. Not only do we love things to stay the same, we love them to stay the same when our people are in power. For the Pharisees and the scribes who were in power, Jesus was a threat. He was a threat religiously because the people followed after him and he might unseat them from their roles of authority. He might split them because people will begin following him rather than listening to the scribes and Pharisees. To the Romans, he's a threat. We can think about it today. Every sign of Jesus coming into Jerusalem is the welcoming of a victorious king. And all the hubbub, later on, and as we go through Passion Week, we will see that there's fear that the Jews build upon with Pontius Pilate, that he is causing an uprising. The beginning of that uprising, of course, is this triumphant entry into Jerusalem. And so Jesus is a threat both to religious authorities and to the Roman Empire. And he comes in riding a donkey. Now, the image that's painted for us would harken back to an image in Maccabees after Simon is victorious. He comes in, he's riding a war horse. Everybody's playing musical instruments. They all have palms, again, as symbols of victory. They lay it at their feet and the clothing. It would also harken back to Solomon, who was greeted this way. And of course, religious people, authorities would be greeted this way. Who would, just like we greet our bishop, we go out to the gate, we greet him there, and as he comes in, we don't greet him with palms of victory and all that as much. Maybe in the old days we did. But as he's coming in, people would lay clothing at his feet and symbols of honor. And then, of course, he would make his way to the temple. This is the way a king would be greeted. This is the way an emperor would be greeted. And so Jesus is greeted this way. Now, there's something, of course, unique about Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem is that he's sitting on a young donkey, which is very unusual because a victor would sit on a war horse as the sign of his victory. And so we can see that Jesus' kingdom, that something's not quite worldly about it, something's not quite right about it. He comes and as a sign of humility, he sits on a young donkey. So there are some differences. But the Jews, the Pharisees, the scribes would see the symbolism. Why do they want Jesus to quiet the crowd down? Because they see the symbolism. They see how it ties to the prophecies of the Old Testament. They also fear the Roman authorities. And what is said by many commentators that it is the peasantry that's greeting Jesus. It is the commoners who are out there throwing their clothes at his feet, who have come to believe in him because they've witnessed him raising Lazarus from the dead. And certainly this is the most miraculous sign they've ever seen. And therefore, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Things are about to change. What does Jesus do after he comes to Jerusalem? If you read the various Gospels, they all say the same thing. He comes to Jerusalem, and then he comes and he goes to the temple, and it's in the temple where he winds some cords together, and he whips the money changers in one Gospel. In another, he turns the tables. In one, he simply teaches. But at the end of this triumphant procession, Jesus is tearing up the temple. He's saying, you've turned my house into a house of robbers, my Father's house. And so we see again, although this procession is done in all humility and a symbol of victory, this absolute provocation of the religious authorities, of the people who have put their security in the law and in the temple. Now, everybody gets what they want in today's gospel. The peasantry, if we will, the commoners, greet Jesus as a victorious king. And he is. He is. They actually don't know how he's victorious. They don't understand that his kingdom is not of this world. But when they're greeting him, just like we heard in one of the hymns that we just sung, it is the same as the angelic host greeting him at his throne. They're doing on earth what is being done in heaven, even though they don't understand it. The Pharisees and the scribes, those who were plotting to kill Jesus, because it is expedient, as the high priest said, for one man to die, rather than disrupt the nation, they also get what they want. They get to kill Christ. At the end of this week, he'll be put on the cross, and they'll have their victory, the victory of death for them. But again, they don't understand. They don't understand that even in killing him, that this doesn't mean quite what they think it means. Because the whole process and the upheaval and the fact that the temple is thrown down and rebuilt in 3 days, all of this happens despite their machinations. Now today, as we as Christians celebrate this and we think about the controversy surrounding Jesus and we hold palms in our hands, we are also to think of these, and these are in many ways retrospective in the fact that they're rooted in the past. We're doing what they did when Jesus came to Jerusalem. But these also have more of a significance in that we actually know what the final victory is. We're looking back and we know that when he dies, he will rise again. And so there is a semblance, and we know that he is truly the king. That he is the king of humility. We've come to honor and appreciate who Jesus really is and who he was. And so for us, today is a joyous feast. Joyous because we're not ignorant like the people of old. We have seen the light, we have seen the gospel. So as we process to receive Christ in this holy liturgy, in the Holy Eucharist, let us begin to think about ourselves and the victories that we may have in our own lives. The joy that we should have should be greater than the holy children. And oftentimes we don't have it because we're really not in touch with the effect of the gospel on our own lives. We're fine with this being a past experiment or something that happened we can read about and comment on. But the fact that Christ's death and resurrection, his triumphant entry, as we'll say, who deigned to enter on the foal of an ass for our salvation, that somehow this should really connect with who we are right now, that is often lost on us. So it is our prayer, my prayer, that somehow we would come to terms with this and be able to actually experience the real joy of acknowledging Christ as King and Lord and allowing him to come and uproot our lives. Because we, like the Pharisees and the Jews of that time, those leaders who wanted to kill Jesus, Jesus is humbly trying to come to us also. And he wants to tear down the stones that we build up, the idolatry. He wants to uproot from us those things that don't belong within the true faith. And the question is whether we will stop him, whether we will crucify him. You see, we're not so different from the people of old. We're not so very unique, and fortunately or unfortunately, we also get what we want. If we want to cut the Lord out of our lives, he lets us do this. If we want to worship him, he lets us do this. But what we do when we celebrate this victory is that we ask that somehow that our hearts would be open to the coming week, and that we could absorb the true meaning of the feast and somehow come to know that true victory, which is a joyous victory, in Christ our Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst.
He is